Two colleagues, same job title, same company, same retirement age. At 67, his pension pot is around £232,000. Hers is closer to £105,000. Same office, same desk, same years of service. So what actually happened? That gap, over £127,000, is not a glitch. Research on the UK gender pension gap suggests women retire with around 35% less pension wealth than men on average. One analysis estimates a typical woman retiring with about £105,000 in pension savings, compared with a man's £232,000, a gap of roughly £127,000. And this isn't just a statistic. That gap doesn't show up once on a chart and disappear. It plays out every single month for the rest of your life. In the UK, the gender pension gap is equivalent to retired women missing out on more than 4 months' worth of pension income each year, around £7,600 less on average. If you're a guy watching this, don't click off. This matters for your mum, your partner, your sister, and your household finances too. If you want clear, UK-focused money explainers like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In this video, we're going to cover what actually creates this gap, what you can and can't control, and the specific actions both women and men can take to push back against it. I'll save the biggest one for last, because it's the one almost nobody thinks about until it's too late. So let's start with what the gender pension gap actually is, because it's not the same thing as the pay gap, even though the two are connected. The gender pension gap is the difference in retirement income or pension wealth between men and women. The pay gap affects it, but it's also driven by how long people work, how much they contribute, and how those contributions are invested. Think of it this way. The pay gap is what happens during your career. The pension gap is what you carry into retirement and live with for the rest of your life. And the numbers get worse the closer you look. Among adults aged 55 to 59, some UK data shows women holding median private pension wealth of about £81,000, just over half the £156,000 held by men in the same age group. In other words, the gap in pension savings starts relatively small early in people's careers, but can widen to around 50% by the time they reach their 50s. Then there's life expectancy on top of all this. On average, women live longer than men, which means they need their pension wealth to last for more years. So, women retire with less, and they need it to stretch further. That's the double hit. This gap doesn't come from one single cause. It comes from 3 big drivers that compound over decades. And the second one is where things get really interesting. The first driver is career patterns and caring breaks. The gender pension gap is partly driven by career breaks for childcare or caring responsibilities, and by higher rates of part-time working among women. Here's why that hits pensions so hard. Workplace pension contributions are percentage-based. If your hours drop, your contributions drop. If you take unpaid leave, contributions stop altogether. Think about 2 people, both starting on £35,000 a year. He works full-time from 25 to 67. She does the same, but spends several years working part-time for childcare and takes a career break in the middle. Same contribution rate the whole time. His pot can end up 30 to 40% bigger. Not because he worked harder, but because his contributions kept compounding without interruption. Some analyses suggest that an average 10-year career gap can cost around £39,000 in lost pension savings. That's not a rounding error. That's years of retirement income. The second driver is the pay gap feeding directly into missed employer contributions. The UK gender pay gap is still in the low teens, roughly 13% on recent figures. Because pension contributions are a percentage of salary, even a modest pay gap means lower contributions every single year. And lower employer contributions too. Many employers offer matching. They'll top up your contributions up to a certain level. If you're on a lower salary and contributing less, you might not hit that match ceiling. So, you're not just putting in less of your own money, you're missing out on free employer money as well. If your employer matches up to 5% and you're only putting in 3%, you're literally leaving part of your pay packet on the table. At the same time, men are still more likely to be in higher earning roles and in senior positions where pension schemes and matching can be more generous. Men are also more likely to be enrolled in company share schemes, giving them extra income they can direct into retirement savings. All of that widens the gap, even when the rules of the scheme are technically the same. The third driver is confidence, risk, and investment choices. And this is where we need to be careful, because this isn't about blaming women for being cautious. Surveys consistently show women are more likely to feel unsure about where to start with investing and less confident in making financial decisions. That's not a character flaw. It's what happens when financial education has historically been pointed more at men. But the compounding impact is real. If one person's pension sits in a low-growth cash-style fund, and another is invested in a broad index fund earning 5 to 6% on average over decades, they don't end up a bit behind. Over 20 or 30 years, that difference in growth rate can mean hundreds of thousands of pounds. Time in the market, in a decent growth fund, matters enormously. Before we get to what to do about this, I want to talk directly to the guys watching, because this is where the video shifts gear. Very few people retire completely alone. Women are more likely to be single in later life due to widowhood or divorce, which increases their risk of poverty in retirement. If your partner's pension pot is dramatically smaller than yours, that's not just her problem. It's a household vulnerability. Divorce, illness, one partner needing care earlier. Any of those scenarios can expose the cracks if one pot is 30 to 40% smaller than the other. UK figures show women are overrepresented among pensioners in poverty. Around half or more of pensioners in poverty are women. That's what the gender pension gap looks like at the extreme end. It's not just an equality issue, it's a resilience issue. The gender pension gap is basically a household resilience gap. So what can actually be done? Let's start with what women can control directly. The single biggest lever, if you're employed, is staying in your workplace pension and knowing what you're contributing. Auto-enrollment minimums in the UK are around 8% of qualifying earnings, with at least 3% from your employer. If you opt out, you give up your employer's contributions, basically refusing part of your pay. Unless you have a very specific reason, staying enrolled is almost always the better financial decision. But the minimum is just the floor. For many people, that minimum builds a pot that falls short of a comfortable retirement. Even nudging your own contribution from, say, 5% to 7% of your salary can make a meaningful difference over 20 to 30 years, especially when your employer is matching part of that, and compounding is doing the heavy lifting. The second practical move is using life events as contribution reset points. Every time your income changes, returning from maternity leave, kids starting school, getting a pay rise or promotion, use that moment to revisit your pension percentage. Before lifestyle creep absorbs the extra income, divert a slice straight into your pension or ISA. That habit alone, repeated over a career, can close a big chunk of the gap. Third, investing doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to pick individual stocks or watch markets every day. For most people, the framework is simple. Broad, low-cost index funds inside a workplace pension, a personal pension like a SIPP or another tax-efficient wrapper, or a default life strategy fund if your scheme offers one. The goal is steady exposure to growth assets over time, not chasing the perfect fund. The gap between a 2% long-term return and a 5 to 6% return over 30 years is not a minor detail. It is the difference between an okay pot and a genuinely life-changing one. If you want to go deeper on how to actually build a pension pot that gives you real retirement income, not just the bare minimum, let me know in the comments. I've got a video on that coming, and I want to know if it's something you'd find useful. And if this video has already shifted how you're thinking about pensions, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of thing we break down regularly on this channel. Now, let's come back to what men can actually do, because this is more specific than be supportive. If one partner pauses or reduces work for childcare or caring, consider the other partner increasing pension contributions in that partner's name to keep things balanced. You can set up a standing order into a partner's personal pension, a SIPP, as part of the household budget. Even if someone isn't working, you can usually pay up to £2,880 a year net into their SIP and have the government top it up to £3,600 with basic rate tax relief. Over several years, that adds up. When you're making joint decisions about what to do with extra money, overpay the higher earner's pension, or boost the lower earners, don't just chase the biggest immediate tax relief. Think about balancing future independence. 2 solid medium-sized pots are often safer than one huge pot and one tiny one. If you're a manager or business owner, you've got extra leverage. Look at whether your policies make it easy for staff with caring responsibilities to keep contributing. Shared parental leave, decent maternity and paternity packages, and continuing employer pension contributions during leave can all make a measurable difference to someone's eventual retirement pot. Even something as simple as offering a pensions education session or making sure HR explicitly explains matching and contribution options to part-time staff can shift behavior. Now, it's worth being honest. A lot of what drives this gap exists at a structural level. The UK has one of the larger gender pension gaps among developed countries. Progress has been slow. Some analyses suggest it has only narrowed by a few percentage points over nearly 2 decades. On that trend, closing the gap entirely could take many decades if nothing else changes. So yes, policy needs to change. But that doesn't mean individual decisions don't matter. One household, one workplace, one person making a slightly different choice today can stop the gap being as wide in their own life as it is in the averages. The gender pension gap isn't inevitable. It's what happens when all the small disadvantages, the career break, the lower contribution rate, the cautious default fund, compound quietly in the wrong direction for 40 years. The earlier you see it, the more of that compounding you can redirect in your favor. If you want to know exactly how much you actually need in your pension pot to retire comfortably in the UK, with real numbers, not vague rules of thumb, that video is right here. Watch it next.